Hello, everyone. Maybe. Facebook's not working well up here. It's just circling, so I'm assuming I'm live. And maybe I'll be able to see comments. Jax West from Stephen Avery Project, Justice with Jax, MAM Gossip. I'm an hour late today. Um, I had a shrink appointment at our normal time, so I pushed it back an hour for story time today. We had been doing them we did them last week on Monday and Wednesday. Yesterday was a holiday here in the States, so I said I would do Tuesday and Wednesday this week. We're reading Wrecking Crew by John Ferrick. Everybody assumes it's by Kathleen Zellner since her picture's on there, but it's not. It's by John Ferrick, who was just a reporter in Wisconsin at the time. And we are we'll be starting on chapter 11. We're on page 109 out of 361 pages. So I read for about 2 hours. So it is 2 p.m. here right now on Tuesday, Central Time, Chicago Time, whatever you want to call it. So I will read until 4 p.m. and then tomorrow we'll continue. I don't know how many of these I'll have to do till we're done reading the book. But for this week, we'll be live on today and tomorrow. But tomorrow, it'll be at our normal bat time of 1 p.m. I hope. Because I've got another errand I have to do tomorrow. So, but I will try to be here by 1 o'clock so we can go back to reading. And big yawn. So, Wrecking Crew, John Ferrick. Chapter 11, Bathroom Sink, it's titled. And let me also say that while I'm reading, I may not see your questions, comments, concerns since I'm looking at the book. So if somebody else is here watching and can answer somebody's questions or whatever, please do. So far, I haven't seen any comments. Doesn't mean there hasn't been any because I never know with this if it's going to show me the comments or not. So, but I'm just going to get started. Off we go. Ready? Set. When Colborne interviewed Avery face to face on the evening of Thursday, November 3rd, one thing stood out. Colborne did not notice any gash or open wound on Avery's hand. The wound did not bust open until after Colborne left and went on his way back to the sheriff's office. If Colborne had noticed a bloody gash, he would have made a notation of such when he finally wrote up his first incident report of the event 8 months later. I need to get my keyboard out of the way. Quote, I, Sergeant Colborne, attended a pretrial conference. I mentioned that I had made initial contact with Stephen Avery on Thursday, November 3, 2005. It was suggested to the sergeant on June 29, 2006, that I make an entry on this case narrative being the key phrase there, describing my initial contact with Stephen on November 3, 2005, unquote. Colborne was the noon to 8 p.m. shift commander. Quote, I personally responded to Avery Auto Salvage initially to make contact with Charles Chuck Avery in an attempt to locate the missing person. The Calumet Sheriff's Office had provided me with a registered plate which corresponds with a Toyota RAV4 registered to the missing person, as well as a name of the missing person, that being Teresa Halbach, unquote. When he got to Avery Road, Colborn went to the main business office near Alan Dolores' trailer. Quote, "Hello, Natalie. As I exited my squad, again my intention was to walk to Chuck's trailer and make contact with him. However, as soon as I exited my squad, Stephen Avery exited Alan and Dolores' trailer from the garage area and made contact with me. Stephen inquired as to what I was on the property for. I asked Stephen if a girl from Auto Trader magazine had been on the property that day taking pictures of a vehicle they were selling. Stephen replied that the female had indeed been on the Avery property and that she had been photographing a van which his sister was selling," unquote. Oh, look, right away he's admitting that she was there. That's weird. Even though Avery consistently told everyone that Teresa came between 2 and 2:30 p.m., Colborn chose to write down, quote, "It was somewhere around 3 p.m., unquote. Quote, "He informed me that he did not speak with her and she had only been on the property 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Stephen stated that he did not speak with her and therefore would not know where she was going when she left the Avery property. Stephen did volunteer the information that he glanced out the window of his residence and observed her photographing the van. This is how he knew she was on the property," unquote. When Colborn left the Avery compound, no evidence pointed to Avery as the abductor. Oddly, Colborn never went and spoke with Chuck Avery, even though his report indicated visiting with Chuck was his main intention. When Colborn quote, "As far as making contact with the Avery family or returning to the Avery property, no further action was taken on November 3, 2005 by this sergeant," unquote. Here's what Avery remembers happened. Quote, "After that conversation, I drove my Pontiac Grand Am from my parents' residence to its usual parking spot outside my garage. I got out of my car and walked to my sister's trailer, which was right next to mine. There, I broke open a cut on the outside of the middle finger of my right hand as I was attempting to unhitch my sister Barb's trailer. Before going to my trailer to put masking tape on my finger, I went into my Pontiac to grab my phone charger. I dripped blood into my Pontiac on the gear shift and other places. Anyone who looked through the windows of my Pontiac could have seen the blood on the gear shift and known there was a cut on my hand. I left my Pontiac unlocked," unquote. Shortly thereafter, Avery, along with his brother Chuck, drove into Manitowoc to buy supplies at Menards. Video surveillance from the store confirms this event. Quote, "I remember that I went to Barb's door to see if any of her sons wanted to go with me to Menards. Bobby and Blaine were home. I asked Bobby and Blaine if they wanted to go with me and my brother to Menards. I told both of them that a law enforcement officer had just left the property after asking me questions about Ms. Halbach's visit to photograph Barb's van on October 31, 2005. I noticed that Bobby, the killer, was immediately nervous after I mentioned the visit by the officer. He said that he could not go with me to Menards and that he had things to do. My memory is that Blaine said he wanted to go to Menards and he went with Chuck and me," unquote. But Avery had just split open his finger. That was troublesome and painful. Quote, "Prior to leaving for Menards, I returned to my trailer to put tape on my bleeding finger. I entered my trailer through the south door because it was closest to the bathroom. I did not lock the south door of my trailer after I entered through it. A large amount of blood dripped into the rim and sink and the floor of the bathroom. I did not wash away or wipe up because Chuck was waiting for me to go to Menards. The time they left was between 7:15 and 7:30 p.m. The skies were dark." Quote, While we were leaving Avery property, driving a flatbed to Menards in Manitowoc, I saw taillights in front of my trailer, Avery remembers. The taillights were further apart and higher off the ground than sedan taillights. I told my brother, who was driving, about the taillights. We turned around and drove to my trailer, but the vehicle was gone. Unquote. All told, Avery and his older brother were gone about 3 hours. They didn't make it back to Avery Road until 10 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Quote, by the time we got home, I was real tired. I went into my trailer through the front door and went straight to bed. I did not go back into my bathroom on November 3. Unquote. On Friday, November 4, Avery got up around 6 a.m. He walked down the hall to his bathroom to take a shower, but was befuddled when he noticed his sink. Quote, I saw that most of the blood on my sink, which I had not cleaned up the previous night, was gone. It seemed to me that the blood had been cleaned up. After reviewing more case documents and thinking about what happened on November 3, 2005, I do not believe that law enforcement broke into my trailer and took blood from my sink and planted it in Ms. Halbach's vehicle. Unquote. In retrospect, Avery now suspects the following events occurred after he went to Menards that night. Quote, I believe that Bobby, the killer, removed the blood from my sink and planted it in the RAV4. Law enforcement would not remove the blood from the sink because they would not know that the blood belonged to me and would believe that it belonged to Ms. Halbach. Only the killer would know that the blood did not belong to Ms. Halbach, and only someone who saw my finger bleeding would know that the blood was mine. So I think that the only person who was there and knew my finger was bleeding and could have gotten into my trailer was Bobby, the killer. He would have taken the blood to frame me and save himself. Here's a picture of an example of the blood in the sink. Quote, Bobby, the killer, drove his Blazer to the front of my trailer, and it was his Blazer taillights that I observed as truck turned on State Highway 147. I do not believe that the vehicle could have come from any other location than the Dassey Yonda place because the vehicle was gone in the 2 minutes it took Chuck Blaine and I to return to the trailer. Unquote. Avery also pointed out, quote, the vehicle had to already be on the property when we left, and Bobby's vehicle was the only vehicle that was present at the time we left. I believe that my trailer door was unlocked, but even if it were locked, the Dasseys had a key to my trailer at their place. Unquote. By sheer coincidence, Zellner retained the services of Stuart James, one of the country's foremost experts on blood spatter and bloodstain analysis. Earlier in this book, there was mention of the 2006 Omaha murder of Jessica O'Grady that I skipped. Blah, 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 and I'm skipping all of that. We don't care. We don't care. Quote, Mr. James oversaw experiments that conclusively refute Mr. Kratz's argument that the sheer volume, the sheer number of places, rule out that the blood in the RAV4 was planted. The experiments demonstrated that it was actually a small amount of blood that was planted in the RAV4, and it was selectively dripped, and one stain most probably was applied with an applicator. Mr. James opines that the most likely source of Mr. Avery's planted blood was the blood deposited by Mr. Avery in his sink on November 3, 2005, and not blood from the 1996 blood vial. Mr. James, because of his familiarity with EDTA blood vials, opines that the hole in the top of the 1996 blood vial tube was made at the time Mr. Avery's blood was put in the tube, and the blood around the stopper is a common occurrence and does not indicate that the tube was tampered with. So you can see the blood there at the top of this tube, right? But you also don't see a hole in the top. And this was done several years ago. So does the hole disappear after a period of time? Regarding the blood spatter in the RAV4, quote, Mr. James, based upon the experiments that he oversaw, opines that the blood spatter found in the RAV4 was selectively planted because the experiments demonstrated that if the state's theory that Mr. Avery was actively bleeding from the cut on his right middle finger was true, then blood would have been deposited in many more places in the RAV4 than where it was deposited. Quote, the blood spatter experiments conducted with actual blood on the subject's middle finger conclusively demonstrate that the blood would have been deposited on the RAV4's outside door handle, key ring, steering wheel, the gear shift lever, brake lever, battery cables, and hood prop. The blood found in the RAV4 was only deposited in 6 places, not 15, and consisted of small drops of blood in the front of Ms. Halbach's RAV4 on the driver and passenger seats, driver's floor, and rear passenger door jamb, unquote. At Avery's trial, Sweaty Sweat speculated the blood in the back resulted when Avery picked up and tossed Teresa's dead body into the cargo area of her vehicle. Stuart James's recreation of the crime concluded Kratz got it wrong. Shocker. Quote, Mr. James opines that the blood spatter on the inside of the rear cargo door was the result of Ms. Halbach being struck with an object consistent with a hammer or mallet while she was lying on her back on the ground behind the vehicle after the rear cargo door was opened. Mr. James opines that the state expert, Mr. Nick Stalkey, mistakenly described the blood on the rear cargo door as having been projected from Ms. Halbach's bloodied hair after she had been shot and she was thrown into the cargo area of the vehicle. Mr. James, by overseeing a series of experiments, opines that the state's description of the cause of the blood spatter on the rear cargo door resulting from Ms. Halbach being thrown into the cargo area and blood being projected from her bloodied hair on the cargo door is demonstrably false. The erroneous blood spatter testimony of the state's expert Mr. Stalkey, resulted in the state presenting a false narrative to the jury about the sequence of events surrounding the attack on Ms. Halbach. The state presented a scenario where Ms. Halbach was already fatally injured in Mr. Avery's garage prior to being thrown in the back of the RAV4. The experiments overseen by Mr. James demonstrate Ms. Halbach was struck on the head after she opened the rear cargo door. She fell on the ground next to the rear bumper on the driver's side, where she was struck repeatedly by an object similar to a mallet or hammer. And then the picture of when they were recreating. Unquote. After Avery was arrested and charged, he insisted to his lawyers, Strang and Buting, that his blood was planted in the RAV4 coming from his bathroom sink. However, they ended up settling on a far more salacious theory. They decided to make Colborn and Lank the culprits of their blood planting defense. In fact, the following time sequence makes it virtually impossible for Sergeant Colborn to be the blood planter, according to Zellner's fact-finding probe. Quote, after Sergeant Colborn came to the Avery property on November 3 to speak with Mr. Avery around 7 p.m., he attended a meeting at the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office at 8 p.m. Unquote, Zellner explained. It takes 23 minutes to drive from Avery's to the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office headquarters next to the downtown courthouse. If Avery, Chuck, and Blaine Dassey left for Menards at 7:15 p.m., Colborn only had 22 minutes to pull it off. If they left at 7:20 p.m., then Colborn only had 17 minutes. If the Averys left at 7:25 p.m., then Colborn only had 12 minutes. If they did not leave until 7:30 p.m., then Colborn only had 7 minutes. Quote, It is therefore extremely improbable that Sergeant Colborne planted Mr. Avery's blood in the Hallbox vehicle on November 3, 2005. After devoting nearly 3 years to studying the psychology of Teresa's murder, Zellner surmises the killer realized there was a limited window to frame Avery. Quote, "The killer was familiar with the Redont and Manitowoc County pits. He devised a plan to bring the RAV4 from the murder scene to the Avery property. He knew that he needed to put something with the DNA of Mr. Avery in the RAV4." Unquote. When Stephen left for Menards, his south door to the red trailer was unlocked because he didn't expect anybody to break in. Quote, "The killer entered the trailer, intent on finding an item of Mr. Avery's with his DNA that he could use to plant DNA in the RAV4 to connect Mr. Avery to Ms. Hallbox's murder. In the small trailer, the killer noticed fresh blood in the bathroom sink. The killer quickly collected the blood from the sink in Mr. Avery's bathroom and deposited the blood in several spots throughout the RAV4. The killer recognized that the blood had to be planted quickly, within 15 to 28 minutes, and before it coagulated." Unquote. If Teresa's RAV4 was being stashed near the old dam off Highway 147, it would only take Bobby, the killer, 1 to 2 minutes to get there from Avery Road, do the deed, and get back home before his brother and 2 uncles returned from the Manitowoc Menards. But if Bobby, the killer, did the deed, the next logical question to ask is, how? This is the only thing that I really differ with Kathleen on. I just don't believe that Bobby planted the blood. Lincoln Colborne planted the key and the bullet, and I think they did the blood as well. I can't tell you when or how, but I still firmly believe they're the ones that planted his blood. But if it turns out to be Bobby, not surprised by that. I do believe Bobby is the killer. Chapter 12, Blood Doctor. Born in 1941 in New York City, Stuart James obtained his bachelor's in biology and chemistry from Hobart College in New York in 1962. He later went on to graduate school at Elmira College, where he studied bloodstain evidence, homicide investigations, and forensic microscopy. Among his many accolades, James became certified in 1997 as a competent forensic expert in the discipline of bloodstain pattern interpretation, and he was elected as a distinguished member of the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts in 2004. James has given consultation and testimony in the following places: Alaska, Arkansas, California, Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York. It probably would have been better at this point to just list where he hasn't. North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, Wisconsin, Republic of South Korea, Toronto, Canada, St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Mannheim, Germany. The person's work he was asked to critique was that of Sweaty Sweat Sweat, who had limited prior experience trying a murder case in Calumet County, according to a review of Westlaw filings. Before conducting their analysis in Teresa's murder, James and Associates forensic consultants studied photos of the RAV4, bone fragments, the burn area behind Avery's garage, burn barrel contents, the burned cell phone, the garage and its contents, and bloodstains on Avery's bathroom floor. Additionally, James reviewed the DNA reports, trial testimony, and arguments, including that from Sweaty Sweat Sweat anthropologist Leslie Eisenberg, and forensic scientist Stalky. He also gave his undivided attention to the photographs of Teresa's cargo door, portions of the plastic dashboard of the RAV4, and chapters from Sweaty Sweat's book, Avery, The Case Against Stephen Avery and What Making a Murderer Gets Wrong. Here's a picture of the guy. James found it noteworthy to mention how, quote, Kevin Heimerl, special agent with the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation, described there being no blood spatter in Mr. Avery's garage, unquote. Quote, I have reviewed the trial testimony of John Ertl, field response technician of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Ertl testified that he had some experience as a bloodstain pattern analyst and that he saw no bloodstain patterns whatsoever in Mr. Avery's garage, James said. To a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, the absence of bloodstain patterns from a gunshot in Mr. Avery's garage is inconsistent with Ms. Halbach being shot in the head in that location, unquote. As for Avery's red trailer, James found it telling that Ertl, quote, found no evidence of bloodstain patterns in Mr. Avery's trailer. To a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, the absence of bloodstain patterns in Mr. Avery's trailer is inconsistent with a brutal attack occurring in that location. Further, the complete absence of Ms. Halbach's blood in Mr. Avery's trailer is inconsistent with her being stabbed or otherwise having sustained a significant bloodletting injury in Mr. Avery's trailer, unquote. But didn't Sweaty Sweat have a comeback for that? Didn't Manitowoc County special prosecutors speculate that perhaps the empty jugs of bleach around the Avery property proved Avery and Brendan teamed up to saturate the concrete surface of Avery's garage to get rid of all Teresa's blood, and they were masters at it, leaving no blood behind? Quote, in my professional experiences, it is extremely difficult to clean blood stains with heavy applications of bleach and paint thinner, unquote, James said. At Avery's murder trial, his defense was handicapped and severely undermined because his lawyers chose not to hire a bloodstain pattern expert. The effort, I'm just saying the wrong words, even though I'm reading the right words. The effect was disastrous because, as a result, the defense wasn't able to put forth a compelling argument against a persuasive prosecutor. Quote, the prosecutor, Sweaty Sweat, argued that Ms. Halbach was thrown into the rear cargo area of the RAV4 and that her blood was in motion when it struck the interior panel of the cargo door. The cargo door of the RAV4 opens with hinges on the passenger side of the vehicle to create a 90-degree angle with the threshold of the cargo area. If the bloodstain pattern observed on the interior cargo door had been created when Ms. Halbach was thrown into the cargo area and while the cargo door was open, it would likely produce elongated stains that indicate a right to left direction of travel relative to the cargo door. No such pattern was observed on the interior of the cargo door. In fact, Stalky accurately described the bloodstains on the rear cargo area as being, quote, circular or non-circular, unquote. Additionally, there was something else striking about the blood on the cargo door. It was concentrated at the bottom in the left corner. Quote, the bottom of the cargo door is 17 inches from the ground. The concentration of blood stains in this area is not consistent with blood being deposited as a result of Ms. Halbach's body being thrown into the rear cargo area. The pattern on the rear cargo door is consistent with a stationary blood source being struck with a bloodied object and creating a cast-off pattern where the blood droplets have traveled from left to right relative to the rear of the vehicle and onto the open cargo door. I have directed experiments where similar cast-off patterns were created using a hammer swung at a low angle to deposit blood onto the rear cargo door of a 1999 RAV4, unquote. James carried out a first of its kind scientific experiment relative to Teresa's slaying. Kratz, sweaty sweat sweat, didn't do one, and neither did Avery's defense team of Strang and Buting. Quote, for one experiment, a mannequin was obtained to reenact the scenario presented to the jury by the prosecution. Weights were attached to the mannequin to achieve a weight of approximately 135 pounds to replicate Ms. Halbach at the time of her death. Unquote. James worked with staff members of Kathleen T. Zellner and Associates who participated in his series of blood spatter experiments. The mannequin's hair was soaked with EDTA preserved blood, and the vehicle used for the experiment was Zellner's 1999 Toyota RAV4. The volunteer participant was 5'10", 185 pounds, and 36 years old. Avery was listed as being 5'6", 218 pounds, and he was 43 years old. Quote, the goal of the experiment was to replicate the prosecution's version of events. First, one of the volunteers attempted to create a blood stain pattern on the cargo door by fleeing the mannequin, but he was not able to do so. Then, two volunteers threw the mannequin into the cargo area. They could not create a bloodstain pattern similar to what was observed on the rear cargo door of Ms. Halbach's vehicle. Unquote. Finally, James had the volunteers bind the mannequin's hands and feet with rope, quote, in an effort to replicate the scenario described by Brendan Dassey in his confession. The addition of the rope had no effect on the experiment. After I concluded that no blood was being deposited on the cargo door when the mannequin was being thrown into the cargo area, the weights were removed from the mannequin to see what, if any, pattern was created when the weight of the mannequin was reduced to a fraction of Ms. Halbach's body weight. Without the added weight, the mannequin weighed approximately 15 pounds. Even still, we were unable to create a bloodstain pattern that resembled the cast-off pattern observed on the interior of the cargo door. And a picture of when they were doing that. Eventually, another blood spatter experiment involved the RAV4 cargo door being kept wide open. Quote, when completely open, the cargo door sits perpendicular to the threshold of the cargo area. A volunteer from Kathleen T. Zellner and Associates created cast-off bloodstain patterns on the cargo door by wetting the head of a mason's hammer with EDTA preserved blood and swinging. Cast-off bloodstains are created when blood is flung from a bloodied object. Unquote. It was this blood experiment that left James certain as to how Teresa met her end. Hello, David. I was late too. Quote, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, the blood stain pattern observed on the rear cargo door of Ms. Halbach's RAV4 was a cast-off pattern created by a blunt instrument. This bloodstain was not consistent with a knife because the blood droplets cast off by the blade of a knife are usually smaller than those observed on the rear cargo door. This bloodstain was not consistent with a gunshot because droplets of blood resulting from a gunshot are smaller than those observed on the rear cargo door. The bloodstain patterns that were most similar to the pattern observed on Ms. Halbach's rear cargo door were consistent with when the victim's body was in a prone position on her back on the ground with her head near the driver's side of the rear bumper, and the attacker was kneeling over her, striking her with a bloodied object, consistent with a hammer or mallet, while the rear cargo door was open. Quote, it is my conclusion that the bloodstain pattern on the rear cargo door of Ms. Halbach's RAV4 was not created in the manner described by the prosecution and their experts at Mr. Avery's trial. Unquote. Avery's lawyers, Buting and Strang, theorized Lenk or Colborn doctored the vehicle with a Q-tip, or Q-tip is just a cotton swab, of blood once Pam Sturm of God found the car on Saturday, November 5. Sweaty Sweat Sweat dismissed that scenario. For him, the blood was proof of Avery's guilt. In July 2017, James offered up his analysis to the ignition stain. Quote, the prosecution told the jury that all of the blood deposited in the RAV4 was from the cut on the middle finger of Mr. Avery's right hand and that he was actively bleeding. However, there was no blood on the door handle, key, gear shift, interior hood release, hood latch, hood prop, and battery cable. It is my opinion that Mr. Avery's blood in the RAV4 is consistent with being randomly distributed from a source because his blood is present in some locations but absent in some reasonably anticipated locations. The absence of blood stains in these locations, door handle, key, gear shift, interior hood release, hood latch, hood prop, and battery cable is inconsistent with an active bleeder. Unquote. The Avery blood droplets, James interprets, quote, are consistent with an explanation other than Mr. Avery being in the RAV4 and depositing his blood in those locations with his actively bleeding cut finger. Had Mr. Avery been actively bleeding in the RAV4, it is my opinion that his blood and bloody fingerprints would have been deposited elsewhere in the vehicle. Unquote. Once again, James conducted a series of rigorous scientific experiments inside the RAV4 to draw his conclusions. He utilized a pipette to drip blood on the front seats, on a CD case, and on the metal frame by the rear passenger door. Also of note, James used Avery's authentic bathroom sink. It was removed from his Wisconsin trailer and brought to Zellner's suburban Chicago law office about 3 hours away. Also of note, Zellner's 1999 RAV4 had similar upholstery fabric on the seats of her vehicle. This signified the steering wheel, gear shift, dashboard, and console were probably from the same material. Quote, an applicator was used to create the stain near the ignition, James said. For this experiment, I used fresh blood to better represent the time it would take for blood shed by Mr. Avery in his bathroom sink to coagulate and dry. Blood was drawn from a volunteer and was deposited on the bathroom sink from Mr. Avery's residence. The blood dried on the sink for approximately 30 minutes. Dried flakes of blood were then lifted from the sink using a scalpel. Unquote. Thought I just saw something flying by my face. Where was I? At that point, James drew even more fresh blood from his volunteer. Quote, using a pipette, blood was taken from the sink and transported to Ms. Zellner's 1999 RAV4. Blood was then dripped on the driver's seat, the passenger seat, between the driver's seat and center console, on a CD case sitting on the passenger seat, and on the door jamb of the rear passenger door. An applicator was used to recreate the stain near the ignition. Depositing blood in this manner at these locations took less than 3 minutes. Unquote. Moreover, they dripped blood on the carpet floor between the driver's seat and the center console. Quote, the fresh blood absorbed into the carpet and did not form flakes. Unquote. In his final analysis, James categorized the blood drops on the driver's seat as a passive drop. The blood on the passenger seat and CD case also were passive drops. He classified the blood on the passenger side door jamb as passive drop with flow pattern. The blood near the driver's ignition was produced, quote, with an applicator, unquote. Quote, the stain near the ignition of Ms. Halbach's RAV4 was approximately 2.25 inches from the ignition, James said. To a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, Mr. Avery would not have deposited blood at that location with his right middle finger while turning the key of the ignition. I've said that a million times. There's no way you turning a key and then this is going to hit it. It's hard to say whether Avery would have walked free had Strang and Buting directed their suspicions about the planted blood as coming from an alternative suspect instead of trying to blame Link and Colborn for any and all shady behavior. Quote, I told my trial defense lawyers that my blood in the RAV4 had been taken from my sink, unquote, Avery said. Quote, I woke up at 6 a.m. and I went into the bathroom to take a shower. I saw that most of the blood on my sink, which I had not cleaned up the previous night, was gone. It seemed to me that the blood had been cleaned up. I tried to tell my defense attorneys about the blood in the sink. They did not listen to me and told the jury the blood came from a blood tube at the courthouse, unquote. If the killer methodically planted blood from Avery's sink, the job could be accomplished with a wet sponge and driving to the RAV4 hidden at the old dam along Highway 147 in barely 5 minutes. Dripping the blood inside the RAV4 would take 60 to 90 seconds. Besides a wet sponge, a rag or wet towels would work, James determined. What does Zellner say about the performance of Buting and Strang regarding their unsuccessful attempt to blame Link and Colborn for planting the blood? Quote, Mr. Avery's trial defense counsel relied exclusively upon a frame-up theory of defense, correctly arguing that all evidence inculpating Mr. Avery was fabricated, unquote. Zellner said, quote, however, they incorrectly argued that Mr. Avery's blood found in Ms. Halbach's vehicle was planted by law enforcement and that it came from a 1996 blood vial held in the Manitowoc County Clerk of Court's office. Trial defense counsel represented to the jury that the seal of the 1996 blood vial package had been broken and resealed with a strip of Scotch tape. Trial defense counsel would have been aware that this package was opened by members of the Wisconsin Innocence Project in 2002 to examine forensic evidence that could be tested. At that time, Mr. Avery's Wisconsin Innocence Project attorneys broke the seal of the 1996 blood vial package and resealed the enclosed box using only a strip of Scotch tape. There was no credible proof presented to the jury establishing that Lieutenant Link and Sergeant Colborn accessed the Clerk of Court's file to obtain Mr. Avery's blood to plant it in the RAV4, unquote. Zellner has taken Buting and Strang to task for making it appear Link and Colborn had prior knowledge of the blood vial's existence in the courthouse vaults. Quote, however, trial defense counsel failed to present evidence that proved in any matter that Lieutenant Link had knowledge of the 1996 blood vial. The trial defense counsel relied on the transmittal form that showed that other evidence from Mr. Avery's 1985 case was sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab for testing. Simply stated, there is no evidence that Lieutenant Link ever had possession of or even knew about the 1996 blood vial of Mr. Avery's blood stored in the Clerk of Court's office. Despite knowing that there was no provable connection between Lieutenant Link and the 1996 blood vial, trial defense counsel represented to the jury that Lieutenant Link must have inadvertently found the 1996 blood vial in examining the file. The argument was totally lacking in credibility because there was no corroborative evidence. Sorry, Jeff is messaging me. At Mr. Avery's blood in the RAV4 was planted. Current post-conviction counsel's blood spatter expert has been able to demonstrate that all of Mr. Avery's blood in the RAV4 was selectively planted and that the blood spatter on the rear cargo door was not the result of Ms. Halbach being thrown into the cargo area by her attacker, as the state told the jury. The failure of trial defense counsel to have a viable theory supported by expert testimony explaining how Mr. Avery's blood was planted in Ms. Halbach's vehicle all but guaranteed his conviction and life sentence without parole. And then there's a picture of the test of putting the swab by the ignition. On Friday, November 4, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office decided to revisit Avery. Jim Lenk and his apprentice, Detective Dave Remacher, rode together, arriving around 10:20 a.m. If it wasn't evident the night before, it was now apparent during the daylight hours that Avery Road and Stephen Avery were under intense scrutiny. Remacher knocked on the door at Avery's, but no one was home. Next, he walked next door to the gray trailer. Quote, "This is a residence adjacent to the residence belonging to Stephen. I again did not receive any contact from anyone at the residence." Unquote. Before Lenk and Remacher went on their way, they saw a golf cart riding through the scrapyard. It was Avery and his mother, Dolores. Remacher and Lenk introduced themselves, and Avery did not hesitate to answer their questions. Quote, Stephen stated he recalls on Monday, October 31, between 2 and 2:30 p.m., Teresa came to Avery Road and was taking photos of a maroon in-color van parked near his residence. Stephen stated that he had very minimal conversation and contact with Teresa. It was just, "Hi, how you doing?" Avery estimated Teresa was gone within 5 minutes. Stephen stated Teresa has been on the Avery property numerous times in the past and occasionally comes to the property to take photos of vehicles to be sold. Unquote. At that point, nobody had seen Teresa for 4 days, Remacher informed Avery. If Avery killed Teresa inside his trailer, would he let the two detectives inside to peek around? Remacher and Lenk decided to pose the question to see how Avery reacted. Quote, "I asked Stephen if he would be willing to provide me with a verbal consent to search his residence for Teresa," unquote, Remacher stated. Quote, "Stephen immediately provided verbal consent. He stated we could search the interior of his trailer home. I requested Stephen to accompany Lieutenant Lenk and me to his residence to conduct the search. He seemed very surprised. I felt this was the first time that he had knowledge of or was informed that Teresa Halbach is missing," unquote. Remacher searched the trailer. He opened several doors, including the bedroom, closets, and other doorways and closets throughout the trailer. Quote, "I did not locate any signs of Teresa Halbach inside the residence. Prior to leaving, we thanked Stephen for his cooperation," unquote. By 10:38 a.m., the pair of Manitowoc County detectives drove off. If they expected incriminating clues to turn up at Avery's, Lenk and Remacher were both let down. They left empty-handed, but Avery was definitely not in the clear. The continued presence of Manitowoc County Sheriff's detectives hovering around Avery Road only served to stoke the rumor mill of Avery's involvement. Several hours after Remacher and Lenk left, Avery made a disturbing observation. Quote, "I smelled cigarette smoke in my trailer on November 4, unquote. Avery said, quote, "This was very strange because I did not smoke and Jody, who lived with me, did not smoke." Yes, she did. I thought that someone else had been in my trailer, and I said that in one of my interviews, unquote. So Jody absolutely smokes, but Stephen didn't want her smoking in the trailer, and she was in jail at the time. Although Bobby does not smoke, Bobby the killer, Scott Toddock was a heavy cigarette smoker, Zellner observed. Avery also found signs of forced entry. To document it, he made an entry inside his notebook, the one where he kept Teresa's phone number handy. In his notebook, Avery scribbled the words, quote, "back to patio door," unquote. Quote, "Before I left for the family property in Crivets on November 5, I opened the south door of my trailer and observed pry marks near the door latch," unquote. Not long after the Avery family had cleared out of Avery Road and drove up north to their cottage in Marionette County early that Saturday morning, Teresa's RAV4 was discovered back on the Avery property. However, just the day before that, on Friday afternoon, an older man, accustomed to minding his own business out in the country along Jumbo Creek Road, saw something suspicious from out in his backyard. What the man saw was central to the still developing missing person probe of Teresa. Dun dun dun. Chapter 13. Two Cars. Some Manitowoc County citizens prefer an easy, simple way of life. One such person was Wilmer Siebert, now in his 80s. He lives on Jumbo Creek Road near the massive Fred Redant & Sons sand and gravel pits. He's a junk collector. His backyard is littered with cars and car batteries. His 2-story white house has seen its better days and looks like it would blow over in a strong windstorm. A guy like Siebert never expected to be roped into Teresa's murder investigation, and he certainly never figured his wandering, watchful eyes would have a pivotal role in helping Avery's lawyer expose more police corruption than was initially suspected. Quote, on November 4, 2005, I became aware through the news media that Teresa Halbach was missing and that one of her last stops was at Avery's Auto Salvage. From the media coverage, I learned that Teresa Halbach drove a 1999 Toyota RAV4, blue-green in color, unquote, Siebert said. On Saturday morning, November 5, the RAV turned up double-parked facing in a westerly direction. All the surrounding cars on the outer ridge of Avery Salvage faced east. The persons who decided to dump Teresa's RAV4 there also left it covered with broken tree branches, cardboard boxes, and a rusty car hood. But this was not done to conceal the car, as many people who watched Making a Murderer mistakenly have said. Quote, the tree branches on the RAV show that it was planted by the cops, unquote, Zellner told the author. The branches and random car hood were placed on the vehicle so Kratz could argue that the flyover would not pick up the RAV because it was covered. The other tell that the cops and not the killer planted the RAV is that the vehicle was locked. The killer would not waste time locking the vehicle, unquote. To recap, the following events likely unfolded on Friday, November 4. Sergeant Colborn was off work, but he would not reveal anything he did that day when asked to do so. Colborn made a personal phone call into Manitowoc Dispatch from a private phone line, reciting Teresa's license plates and seeking confirmation she owned a 1999 Toyota. And then there was the sighting by Wilmer Siebert off Jumbo Creek Road. Zellner said the mid-afternoon sighting by Siebert fits with the time frame of former Mishicot Kevin Romlow, who maintains he spoke with Sheriff Sergeant Andy Colborn at the Senex station, alerting Colborn to the turnabout on Highway 147 where Romlow had seen the abandoned vehicle. Quote, sometime before Teresa Halbach's vehicle was discovered, I saw a similar vehicle matching in color, style, and size drive into the Fred Redant Sons Inc. gravel pit on the access road that is just south of my house. I remember this vehicle had the same spare wheel and cover on the rear cargo door as Ms. Halbach's RAV4, unquote, Siebert said. But the RAV4 was not the only vehicle that pulled off Jumbo Creek Road. Quote, I saw a white Jeep closely follow the other vehicle down the access road into the gravel pits. The Jeep looked like an older model and had paint chipping off of the hood, unquote, Siebert said. Two vehicles had sneaked into the far edge of the Avery Salvage property. Siebert, the curious neighbor, watched from his yard. He knew something was up, some mischief. Quote, a short time after the two vehicles entered the gravel pits, the Jeep exited the gravel pits, again using the access road just south of my house, unquote, he said. In 2007, Sweaty Sweat Sweat told the jury deciding Avery's guilt or innocence how, quote, Pam of God Sturm decided it as divine intervention, that it was the hand of God as to where we should look at the 4,000 cars that were on this property. Pam Sturm looked in that one place. She never would have gotten through all those cars, unquote. Back in 2005, people following Teresa's murder investigation did not have the foggiest clue that the real murder investigation was taking place away from the Avery property. This was kept hush-hush, a closely guarded secret for a number of reasons. For one, the search and recovery for noteworthy clues of Teresa's murder far away from Avery's red trailer only served to fuel doubts about his role in causing her to die. There was a general consensus within the ranks of Manitowoc County, Calumet County, and Wisconsin DOJ that Avery needed to be dealt with. This was time to rewrite history and get rid of this persistent, ever-growing public perception problem around Manitowoc County that their local Wisconsin cops were dirty, no good, rotten scoundrels. I could come up with some other words. During the early stages of the case, the police leaned on Avery's adjoining landowner, Joshua Radant, who owned and operated Fred C. Radant Sons quarries. His quarry was directly west and south of Avery's 40-acre tract. Radant, however, was not the only quarry in the immediate area. There also happened to be a quarry directly south of his land, owned by the government of Manitowoc County. Saturday, November 5, 2005, was a date Josh Radant would never forget, and neither would people interested in Avery's plight. Late that morning, the SUV of Halbach, without its license plates, was located by volunteer searcher Pam of God Sturm. Quote, on November 5, 2005, I was with several friends at the hunting camp, unquote, Radant said. Quote, law enforcement officers arrived at the hunting camp and asked us if we had seen or heard anything unusual about the Avery property recently. By this time, there was already news media coverage of Teresa Halbach's disappearance that included coverage of the Avery property, unquote. Thinking fast, Radant remembered how someone at the Avery property was burning a fire a few days earlier. But from his perspective, there was not anything out of the ordinary or suspicious. It went on all the time. Quote, I told the officers I saw a fire, orange in color, when I was driving from the Radant Sand and Gravel Pit to the hunting camp on October 31, 2005, at approximately 5 p.m. I told the officers that I saw the fire from the direction of the Avery property. Because it was dark or getting dark when I saw the fire, I was not sure where exactly the fire was located. I did not observe any smoke coming from the fire, unquote. The fire was hardly roaring. There was no thick black smoke or awful stench, such as the foul smell of a young woman's body from being left outside in an open burn pit on a cool autumn night. In fact, there were probably dozens of bonfires set that night throughout Manitowoc and Calumet County out in the country. After all, it was Halloween night. Quote, the fire did not appear to be spread out, and its flames appeared to be 2.5 to 3 feet in height. These characteristics were consistent with my personal knowledge of burn barrel fires, unquote, Radant said. Quote, I assume the fire was contained in a burn barrel. I did not see whether the fire was actually contained in a burn barrel, unquote. Since the overzealous police out to get Avery were desperate for leads, after all, they lacked a body and any physical evidence, the idea of a fire sounded intriguing. The police made Radant return to their command post headquarters along Avery Road that Saturday evening, hours after the RAV4 had turned up. Quote, less than 1 week after I provided that written statement, 2 officers, who I believe were from the Wisconsin Department of Justice, met me at the hunting camp to discuss the fire I saw, unquote, Radant said. Quote, I remember them asking me if I was sure what I said I saw. It seemed to me that they weren't satisfied with my statement about the fire. Specifically, it seemed to me that they wanted me to change my story to include a larger fire because they were reluctant to accept my story as true. I eventually asked them what they wanted me to say. They told me that all they wanted was the truth. I advised them that I had been telling the truth, unquote. The state investigators made what now appears to be a startling revelation. Quote, at that time, I was told by the Department of Justice agents that they believed Teresa Halbach's vehicle was driven to the Cuss Road cul-de-sac by driving west through an empty field, then south down the gravel road that ran northeast into the Avery property. They told me that they believed Teresa Halbach's vehicle turned northeast onto the gravel road and entered the Avery property at its southwest corner. It is my understanding that this theory was based on the work of scent tracking dogs, unquote, Radant said. If Avery killed Teresa, would he hide her vehicle off-site only to move it back onto his family's property, knowing the police had the area under siege, thinking he was Teresa's abductor and killer? Radant furnished the police the keys to search his 3 deer camp trailers at his sand and gravel pit behind Avery Salvage. Quote, later that day, law enforcement called my cell phone again. They informed me that they completed the search of my trailers and that I could use them normally. Now it says, sorry, we're having trouble playing this video and it went away. So I don't know if you're still seeing and hearing me or not. So let me type. Can you see and hear me? Somebody answer and let me know. Or do I need to stop this video? Oh, and hello, Gwen. Yes, you can see and hear me? Okay. Then I just have a black screen and can't see it, so I'm going to continue. Thank you so much, Gwen. And thank you, Roger. Let me see. Where was I? During the course of this phone conversation, law enforcement informed me that they were going to collect the contents of the burn barrel at the hunting camp at a later time. When I returned to the hunting camp, I observed that they had cordoned off the area surrounding the burn barrel with yellow tape, unquote. Oh, Natalie can see and hear but can't comment. I have no idea, Natalie, why sometimes it lets people comment and sometimes it doesn't. But why was one of Radant's burn barrels at the heart of Teresa's murder mystery? He was never told by police, but he knew something was there. Quote, to the best of my knowledge, Wisconsin State Patrol assigned officers to watch the burn barrel day and night on a rotating basis until its contents were collected. I was not present when the contents of the burn barrel were collected, unquote. Then Radant made another observation during that first week of November while Teresa was still being considered a missing person. He saw the cops on the move. They were far away from the Avery property and working under the cloak of darkness. Quote, a few days after November 2005, I remember seeing tower lights in the Manitowoc County sand and gravel pit to the south of Radant's quarry. I remember the lights appeared to illuminate the entire Manitowoc County pit, unquote. Was the real murder investigation taking place in secrecy, far away from Avery's red trailer and his ramshackle detached garage? Radant began to wonder. Thank you, Jessica. Quote, I understand that there were suspected human pelvic bones recovered from a gravel pit property south of Avery's auto salvage. Upon reviewing a map showing the coordinates at which these bones were found, I believe they were found in the Manitowoc County sand and gravel pit, unquote. Back in 2005, the large county-owned sand and gravel pit would have been the perfect place to burn up a body under the cover of darkness. The property along County Road Q was not being used at the time. The land was isolated, far from any immediate homes or commercial businesses. It spanned hundreds of acres. If someone wanted to trespass at the county quarry or wander through Redon's sand and gravel pits back in 2005, it was fairly easy. There were private property trespassing signs posted around the perimeter of the Redon sand and gravel pits, but that was about it. Quote, there were locking gates or cables at each access road, but they were rarely used, unquote, Redon said. During Avery's trial, Kratz did not want to put Joshua Redon on the witness stand as a prosecution witness. And yet, Sweaty Sweat Sweat was keenly interested in learning what information Redon knew, perhaps so he could spin a yarn for the jury that was simple and easy to follow. Quote, approximately 1 or 2 months before the start of Mr. Avery's criminal trial in 2007, I was summoned to the courthouse, unquote, Redon remembered. Quote, at the courthouse, I was questioned again about my recollection of seeing a fire in the direction of the Avery property on October 31, 2005. I was not called as a witness to testify at Mr. Avery's criminal trial in 2007, unquote. Chapter 14, Canine Noses. It may have been a night for trick-or-treaters, but Travis Groel remained steadfast at work for Redon's gravel pit. He was working near County Highway Q, where he was loading and feeding the rock-crushing machines. He remembered at least one other employee was working there that night. As Groel was hard at work, he noticed a strange smell. There was something lowing in the cool autumn breeze, and it was unsettling. Quote, regarding the smell, he said it was not tires, said it was a smell he hadn't experienced before, so he could not say what was causing it. Groel said the smell was still in the air when he left, and it was coming from east, more towards the middle of the quarry. He did not see any fires, unquote. The surrounding area where Groel was working is rural, rugged terrain just south of Highway 147. There are hundreds of tall, mature cedar trees planted along both sides of Q. The county gravel pit could be accessed by pulling off Q or by someone wandering in from Josh Redon's adjacent quarries. To drive to the pits from Avery's takes only a couple minutes. In November 2005, during the height of the quest to find Teresa, several of Wisconsin's all-around best tracking and cadaver dogs were utilized by law enforcement. The dogs were ushered throughout Avery's red trailer by their handlers and taken near his garage. But those were not the spots that drew the most intrigue. Instead, the action was coming away from Avery's property, about a half a mile away, over toward the spooky stretch of Cuss Road. Cuss Road runs east-west. Avery's place was to the east of Cuss Road. This was a small, secluded local road flanked by tall cedars on both sides of the street. Less than a dozen acres were nestled along Cuss Road off the woodlands. At the end of Cuss Road was a cul-de-sac overlooking Redon's quarries. Way off in the distance, you can see the Avery salvage yard. At the cul-de-sac, however, was a winding little conveyor road. The dirt road led into the back of Redon's deer hunting camp, consisting of 3 mobile trailers. So this is a picture of Cuss Road. Monday, November 7, marked the 5th consecutive day of a constant Manitowoc County law enforcement presence around Avery's property. But not everybody who showed up at Avery Road had a stake in the outcome of making sure that Avery went down hard for the crime. Notably, Kaukauna canine handler Sarah Fosk, who showed up with her bloodhound Loof. Quote, Sheriff Poggle did have 2 pairs of shoes that belonged to Teresa Halbach. Both were bagged separately in plastic bags. I placed sterile gauze in the toes of the shoes and removed the insole in a plastic bag with sterile gauze. The shoes were then secured in my personal vehicle, unquote, Fosk explained. Quote, when Loof began her task of sniffing for Halbach's scent, it was around 1:30 p.m., 57 degrees, and there was a slight breeze, 0 to 5 mile per hour, blowing from the northwest, unquote. Quote, find, unquote, Fosk yelled to Loof. Out near Avery's yard, Loof followed her nose over toward Barb Yanda's maroon van where Teresa had snapped a few photos a week earlier. Eventually, quote, Loof went up to the south door of the trailer home, the door having a small porch entrance, and the door was white in color. Canine Loof wanted to enter the home. Canine Loof continued north along the trailer and went between some pine trees and a burning barrel. Canine Loof smelled a charred area showing some interest, then continued west. Canine Loof went west in a picked cornfield. Directly to the south was a gravel pit, and in between the two was an area of brush and trees, unquote. The dog became preoccupied with the Cuss Road cul-de-sac. Quote, Canine Loof worked this area with indications of very strong scent. Canine Loof worked west, coming out to a cul-de-sac that was taped off with crime scene tape, and 2 deputies were not allowing access. Canine Loof crossed the tape on one occasion and then was told to not go any further. The deputies phoned Sheriff Poggle to see if I could continue, but were told to not allow anyone access at this time. Go figure, unquote. Interestingly, Loof's nose led the bloodhound directly to the same spot that, it just so happens, a small group of men from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office were already inspecting that morning. But these men were not about to let a pair of outsiders into their club. As a result, Fosk and Loof were off limits because it appeared the local police did not want them seeing what they were up to. Was evidence being mishandled or manipulated off Cuss Road? Fosk and her bloodhound weren't allowed access to the closely guarded property a half-mile west of Avery's. Loof was not the only highly specialized dog whose nose steered him away from Avery's. Bob and Julie Kramer of Great Lakes Search and Rescue Canine Group brought along Brutus and Trace, 2 of their top scent tracking dogs. Over the weekend, the Kramers were out with the dogs in one of the quarries east of Avery Road, where the dogs alerted. However, when they returned to the gravel piles that Monday, November 7, Brutus and Trace did not alert at the flag location or the same general area the second time around. Quote, we then proceeded to a location we were requested to check on Cuss Road, where a potential burial site had been located. Canine Brutus checked the area, and after passing the area upon entry in the wooded area, he gave a head check, returning to the location and gave his bark alert. Alert number 12, and seemed particularly interested in a shovel lying next to the disturbed earth, unquote. According to the Kramers, quote, Canine Trace checked the wooded area first and did not alert, but did show interest, increased animation, and high head checks. Upon returning to the area a second time, Canine Brutus again barked and alerted near the area of disturbed earth, unquote. Later on, the pair of dogs drew a new assignment closer to the Avery compound. Quote, at the exterior of the home, Brutus again barked at the door and scratched to enter the residence. Canine Trace also barked at the front door. Once inside the trailer, Canine Brutus proceeded to check the interior, alerting inside a bedroom, at the bed, and a pile of clothing. He was very agitated, but no scent source was noticed, unquote. That particular trailer, however, was not Avery's. It belonged to his older brother, Chuck. To reiterate, Most of the police focus remained off-site, away from Avery's. Quote, Canine Brutus was then sent to check the berm just west of Stephen Avery's property. There was a report of a suspicious-looking pile of disturbed earth. Brutus showed no interest in that pile, but did alert on a pile of brush and trash just west of the Avery residence and was very excited along the edge of the berm. This excitement continued as we proceeded south along this ridge, and he carefully checked brushy areas west of the Avery yard and along the edge of the salvage yard. His behavior was noted by law enforcement personnel in the area, who indicated that man-trailing bloodhounds had also been interested in the same area. Unquote. Back at the command post, Julie Kramer compared notes with the others. Quote, we met with the bloodhound handlers on scene, and it was noted that both live scent dogs and the human remains detection dogs had shown excessive interest in the ridge of land beginning behind Stephen Avery's residence and running south to the corner of the salvage yard where the gravel conveyor is located. This area seems to be of particular interest to the dogs, although no scent source has been located in the area. Unquote. During Avery's trial, any mention of law enforcement's regular presence along Kuss Road during the early stages of the investigation was downplayed. Sweaty Sweat Sweat tried to avoid the sensitive subject. Just what was Manitowoc County's preoccupation with this area far removed from Avery's trailer? Why were police devoting their utmost time and careful attention to this area if it was of no relevance at all? The answer seems obvious. The police probably uncovered clues and signs of a violent crime. Therefore, they needed to be very secretive and clandestine. Little was written about the efforts to mine the quarry properties for physical evidence related to Teresa's violent death. Along those lines, the police statements that were written down and entered into the official case file were strange. Some police reports divulged that Calumet investigator Mark Wiegert had contacted colleague John Dietering at 10:35 a.m. on Monday, November 7. Quote, he requested that an investigator go to the east end of Kuss Road. I did respond to the area and spoke with retired Deputy Inspector Michael Bushman, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office. Bushman was leading a team of searchers in the area. It should be noted that the end of Kuss Road is approximately 1/2 mile from the western edge of the Avery property. I arrived at the east end of Kuss Road approximately 10:45 a.m. and spoke with former Deputy Inspector Bushman. He indicated he had found a possible excavation site and did take us to the site. The area was then taped off with crime scene tape, and the area was frozen. No one was allowed in or out. Unquote. Roughly 6 hours of time was spent on Kuss Road, the very same spot where the dogs kept finding Teresa's scent. And yet, Dietering's report made the following declaration, quote, at 4:51 p.m., I was notified the excavation area was not pertinent to this case. Unquote. The mere fact that Bushman showed up to work Teresa's investigation and then had a leading role in the biggest event of November 7 warrants further scrutiny. Mike Bushman's name is mentioned in only 3 paragraphs in the entire Calumet County investigative file, which consists of 1,116 pages. Bushman was not even active law enforcement anymore. He was retired from Manitowoc County, the tarnished agency that already had a direct conflict of interest in spearheading the evidence-gathering efforts against Avery. But Bushman's role in the case went much deeper. As mentioned in Chapter 2, Bushman had a direct role in carrying out the biggest miscarriage of justice in northeastern Wisconsin. Bushman, along with then Sergeant Kenny Peterson, had implicit orders to arrest Avery for the vicious attack and rape, there was no rape, of the candy store owner along the sandy shorelines of Lake Michigan. Now, 2 decades later, Bushman sprang out of retirement to fulfill another important task, which marked the 8th day of Teresa's disappearance. As mentioned earlier, much of the preoccupation at Avery's trial by Strang and Buting surrounded evidence planting suppositions. But at that time, a decade ago, nobody was giving much credence to an alternative scenario. If the sheriff's higher-ups at Manitowoc County had no concerns about using fake evidence to nail a guilty suspect or frame somebody they loathed, wouldn't they be just as devious about making legitimate evidence and legitimate crime scenes go away or disappear to seem as if they never existed in the first place? If that were so, such an assignment was highly sensitive, incredibly covert, and could only be carried out by someone up to the task. A logical candidate would be someone experienced at covering up crime scenes or staging an incident to divert attention away from a criminal suspect to someone else. That person would need to be dependable and someone who would never squeal. Aside from Teresa's killing, the biggest mystery case at the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office during the past 20 years concerns the long-suspected police cover-up of the gruesome death of a local teenager, Ricky Hochstetler. He died on a snowy January night in 1999, just 6 years before Teresa was slain. The lead investigator assigned to that case by Peterson and Kasurik was a fiercely loyal traffic lieutenant named Mike Bushman. Under Bushman's direction, the culprit responsible for the Ricky Hochstetler tragedy was never identified, and scores of locals suspect the case remained intentionally unsolved. Other key Manitowoc Sheriff's officials assigned to work on that case included Andy Colborn, James Lenk, Dave Remaker, and Jason Jost. Hi, Cindy. Chapter 15. Cover-Up. The winter of 1998 marked a contentious time for the husband and wife who rented the 2-story farmhouse on the far southern outskirts of Manitowoc. Once that winter, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office responded for a domestic violence call. The couple was in the midst of a bitter divorce. They had 3 children, the oldest being a teenage boy named Ricky. He had a part-time job at the Manitowoc Hardee's and liked to hang out with fellow teenagers. On Ricky's last night alive, he was dropped off at a house in Manitowoc. Quote, "He was going for a pizza party and movies with his friends," unquote, his mother recalled. Quote, "On that particular night, I was surprised that he didn't call for a ride home. If he felt that it was too cold or too nasty out, he would always call, 'Mom, can you come and get me?' Unquote." When Debbie Hochstetler dropped her son off around 5 p.m. that Saturday, the snow was just starting to fall. As the night wore on, a blowing snowstorm kicked up. Winds became nasty and the snow was drifting. It was not a safe night to be out driving, especially for anyone who had consumed too much alcohol at one of the Manitowoc area watering holes. Quote, sorry, my voice is going now. Quote, "When their movies were done, Ricky walked a friend, Jennifer, home. And then he proceeded to walk home. He was a little past his curfew, so that's probably why he didn't call me. He didn't want to wake me up," unquote, his mother said. Ricky's walk home was about 3 miles. Trudging through snow, Ricky was bundled up in his warm green winter jacket. He began his journey home between 1 and 1:30 a.m. Quote, "He was walking with traffic along the edge of the road, 3 feet off the edge of the road, and they said they could see the vehicle tracks were in and out, in and off the road. Then the vehicle hit Ricky, and he was on the hood of the vehicle, and he was dropped down and dragged, and they said that the person made no attempts to stop," unquote, his mother said. Manitowoc County Highway CR is a dark, desolate road out in the country. The posted speed limit is 50 miles per hour. Ricky endured a brutal, agonizing death. He was struck from behind by an intoxicated motorist right around bar closing time. His broken and battered body separated from the car in the middle of the road. The drunk driver kept heading south on CR for another 2 miles until he reached the T intersection for Newton Road. The hit-and-run motorist had a chance to hop on the interchange for Interstate 43, where heading south goes to Milwaukee and going north ends up in Green Bay. The fleeing motorist chose to stay on the off-the-beaten-path country roads. Keep in mind, these were extremely local roads. Only someone who regularly traveled the back roads of southern Manitowoc County would be driving these roads at such a late hour on a weekend after having too much to drink. There just so happened to be a late-night drinking establishment barely a quarter mile up the road from where Ricky was run over. The Bill Maher Supper Club had been a popular banquet hall and bar for many years around Manitowoc County. Manitowoc's movers and shakers and politically connected wined and dined there. Among them, Manitowoc Sheriff Tom Kosarik had his wedding reception there. There were also a couple of large gatherings at the Bill Maher that particular Saturday night. One was held for employees and guests of the Manitowoc Ice Company, and the other affiliated with the Kopp's General Store. The bar was also open to the general public. A few of the stragglers stayed until the wee hours of the morning, and they pulled out of the parking around the time Ricky was trudging through the drifting snow along the dark road, just minutes away from making it home. The hit-and-run driver who plowed into Ricky and continued driving was already outside of Manitowoc city limits, making it highly unlikely the inebriated motorist lived in Manitowoc. 3 very small communities were in the general vicinity of the drunken motorist's path: the town of Newton, the village of Cleveland, and the village of Kiel. Based on the travel route, a number of other small Manitowoc County communities, such as St. Nazianz, I don't know how to say that, Valders, Whitelaw, and Reedsville, were virtually out of the question. This is known because a Newton resident spotted several broken car parts scattered in the snow the next morning on his way to church. The debris was found 1 mile to the west of County CR at the rural intersection of Newton and Center Roads. That intersection was in the middle of nowhere, 3 or 4 miles south of the city of Manitowoc, which had a population of 35,000. Quote, "I wholeheartedly believe this was an accident," unquote, Ricky's mother said. Quote, "I know this person didn't mean to do it, but this person also needs to take responsibility, come forward, and help this family." Unquote. That Saturday night, Mike Bushman patrolled Manitowoc County's roads as the overnight shift commander. He even saw Ricky's fresh footprints in the snow as he made the rounds along County Highway CR. 5 years later, when the Wisconsin Department of Justice opened an investigation into a suspected police cover-up, a state investigator made this notation concerning Bushman. Quote, "He was going to check on the condition of the person to make sure they were okay, considering the snowstorm. Deputy Inspector Bushman decided to get gas first before following the footprints in the snow." Unquote. Bushman's decision to fill up his squad car rather than check on the wandering pedestrian walking home in the fierce snowstorm possibly cost Ricky his life. The 17-year-old high school student was hit by a car and his body came to a rest in the road only 50 yards away from his front door. Around 2:25 a.m., a newspaper delivery driver made the gruesome discovery. She called 911, and Bushman, Manitowoc County's night patrol commander, learned about the collision as he was filling his tank at the county gas pumps about a half-mile away. He made it to the scene at 2:28 a.m. Around 4 a.m., Bushman and the county coroner, Deb Kakadich, knocked on the front door of the Hochstetler White farmhouse. Debbie Hochstetler was then rustled out of bed and notified that her only son, the oldest of her 3 children, was dead in the middle of the road. He had suffered a fractured skull resulting in brain trauma, as well as spinal cord injuries, a fractured neck, internal injuries, and leg injuries. Many people suspect the cover-up was activated soon after the crime. Off-duty Lieutenant Rob Herman, who was working at the time as the Manitowoc County Juvenile Jail Administrator, managed to rush out to the scene. It's been long suspected by fellow Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies that Rob's younger brother, Todd Herman, may have been the hit-and-run driver, and that Rob showed up at the scene to cover up the crime to ensure the culprit was never identified. The Herman brothers were untouchables in the sheriff's office, thanks to their father. As a result, Sheriff Kosarik and Under Sheriff Kenny Peterson were not about to launch a criminal investigation against one of the Herman brothers. That would never happen, and Bushman would be tapped to run the investigation to make sure of that. Even though the banquet hall parking lot was a quarter-mile up the road from the hit-and-run tragedy, Under Sheriff Peterson told the Manitowoc newspaper within days of the hit-and-run fatality that the Club Bill Maher was not being probed because, quote, "I don't know if the person could have gotten up to a speed that would have caused that kind of injury to the victim or damage to the vehicle," unquote. Peterson was quoted as saying to the Manitowoc newspaper in January 1999. Sheriff Kosarik was also content to let the homicide go cold. He did not want any help from the Wisconsin State Patrol's technical crash reconstruction experts. And he also did not want the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation meddling in the vehicular homicide investigation either. Before an autopsy was even done, the local news media was duped by the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office into believing that Rob Herman single-handedly had figured out the hit-and-run driver's vehicle. The whole thing was a setup to divert attention away from the hit-and-run vehicle. Quote, "I determined the vehicle would have to have a gray painted grille, being a model year from 1985 to 1988, unquote," Rob Herman's reports state. Quote, "This vehicle would include Chevrolet pickups, Chevrolet K5 Blazer, and Chevrolet Suburban," unquote. Weeks later, to add to the confusion, Bushman and Rob Herman alerted the gullible local media that the broken grille parts may also belong to a 1988 to 1991 full-sized van. They summoned Manitowoc County Sheriff's Deputy Jason Yost to pose for a newspaper photo op, standing with his back up against a big blue. The photo, in turn, was seen by thousands of avid newspaper readers in the Manitowoc County area. It served its purpose. It gave the locals the impression that a big full-sized van ran over Ricky Hochstetler, when that was never the case at all. In fact, no van, no truck, no Suburban, and no Blazer were ever found. As for Bushman, a dear friend of Kosarik and the Herman family, who owed both of them for his career in law enforcement after working as a school bus driver, his ambitions of climbing the administrative ladder inside the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office were also riding on his performance running the hit-and-run probe. Would he prove himself worthy to Kosarik and Kenny Peterson? That's what this case was about. As time marched on, though, Bushman recognized that whispers of a police cover-up under his watch were growing louder and louder around Manitowoc County. He decided to take decisive action. He hauled in the father of the hit-and-run victim to the police station for a face-to-face interview. Quote, "I decided to question him about a statement he made reference the opinion that the police may have been involved in the accident and are attempting to cover it up. I wished to catch what type of reaction this would bring," unquote, Bushman's reports indicated. Quote, I stated to him that there are over 300 complaints that I worked on, and many turned to be just rumors, just like this one. For example, that the police were somehow involved in the incident and were intentionally covering it up, unquote. Bushman's decision to confront the victim's poor father by putting the man on the spot had a successful result. Quote, the desired response was received, and the redness in his face, indicating he was embarrassed at that point, indicated he himself had been the source of that type of rumor, unquote. Nobody was arrested that year in 1999 for the vehicular homicide. Kasurik announced his retirement the following year, enabling Peterson to take over the reins. But it remained to be seen who Peterson would appoint to fill the void inside the culture of corruption at the Manitowoc Sheriff's Office. Because of another retirement and his own promotion to sheriff, Peterson now had to fill the two other top administrative openings at the sheriff's office, both the undersheriff and the deputy inspector. Peterson chose the two men within his ranks who were at the center of the cover-up allegations. In 2000, Rob Herman got promoted to undersheriff and Bushman got promoted to deputy inspector. This made Bushman in charge of the entire traffic patrol unit as well as the entire detective bureau, even though he had no prior detective experience. As third in command of the entire agency, Bushman decided to hand the sensitive hit-and-run homicide off to someone he trusted, Detective James Lenk, who would not disappoint him. Under Lenk, no progress was made in terms of identifying the killer, and the sheriff's office was doing nothing to keep the case in the public spotlight. In 2002, the third anniversary, the Associated Press in Milwaukee tracked down Sheriff Peterson for an interview. He assured the reporters that the hit-and-run homicide was not about to be solved. Quote, what it's going to take to solve this thing would just be luck at this point. I doubt if the truck exists anymore, especially in any kind of evidentiary form, unquote, Peterson was quoted as saying. But why was Sheriff Peterson such a proud pessimist? Several employees within the Manitowoc County, the ones who had integrity and held their heads high with dignity, suspected their administration had been infiltrated by a number of rats. They believe Ricky's case was a shoddy investigation that arose from incompetence, flat-out corruption, or a combination of both. Bushman and Rob Herman, the two key promotions given by Peterson, were both responsible for compromising physical evidence, broken vehicle debris found at the snowy scene during the early morning hours of January 10, 1999. Regardless of their motive, their conduct jeopardized any future attempts at prosecuting the culprit. Even though this was a high-profile vehicular homicide involving the death of a local teenager, the two men at the sheriff's office had not properly tagged, logged, and photographed the broken vehicle parts discovered at the hit-and-run scene. Sound familiar? Most disturbingly, Bushman gave Herman permission to scoop up the vehicle debris from the scene and to drive around unsupervised with the previous crime scene evidence during the wee hours of the night. Many Manitowoc County residents strongly suspect that the car that hit Ricky Hochstetler ended up at the Herman family's Cleveland Auto Salvage, where it was either repaired or stripped. Cleveland Auto, the family-owned business, was also a perfect place to swap out the evidence. Considering there was strong sentiment within the local law enforcement community suspecting that Ricky Hochstetler's hit-and-run death was a cover-up, one has to realize the police report submitted by Bob Herman may not be reliable. If he was attempting to cover up a crime involving a close family member, there's no telling what was true and what was false. Herman's overnight report states that he drove around to several Manitowoc area closed auto dealerships and closed businesses during the wee hours of the morning in his personal vehicle, with the broken grill pieces from the scene of the crime in his possession. There is also no way to verify that anything he wrote actually happened, since he did not take photos of any of the businesses and auto dealerships he allegedly visited. Furthermore, nobody else was with him. Quote, "You can get fired for that stuff. That piece of evidence might as well not exist. You have made that evidence have less value or no value at all," unquote, noted Brad Turvey, forensic scientist at Forensic Solutions in Alaska. In Turvey's mind, given Manitowoc County's reputation, there's a strong chance that the police tampered with or swapped out the pieces of evidence from the scene if they were attempting to cover up the crime for a fellow officer. Quote, "It's all reputation, and if Manitowoc County had a good reputation, you don't have to defend it. Because of their bad reputation and continually bad decisions, it's a lifestyle. It's not a mistake. It's who they are." Unquote. That's a picture of poor Ricky Hochstetler on the road. Bushman has said he was under the impression that Rob Herman took the broken vehicle parts scattered along CR back to his family's boneyard in Cleveland, which was about 5 miles down the road. The Cleveland Auto Sales and Salvage was just a few blocks away from the home of Todd and Shelby Herman. Both Rob and Todd, had substantial expertise as auto body technicians and mechanics at Cleveland Auto Sales and Salvage, a rival business of Avery Salvage. Quote, "You don't take parts from a crime scene home with you because you don't know who's going to potentially become a suspect," unquote, Turvey added. At no point during his tenure did Bushman ever once investigate Todd Herman or Rob Herman as suspects or co-conspirators in the evidence mishandling escapade. To this day, the question lingers. Why did Robbie Herman, the off-duty juvenile jail administrator, respond to the scene of the crime, take charge, and convince everyone to announce later that same morning that the hit-and-run vehicle was a truck, van, or sports utility vehicle before the autopsy was even done to examine the victim's body and leg injuries? What motive did Bushman and Rob Herman have to feed this information to the press, strongly desiring to have it consumed by the public? In 2004, the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation showed up in Manitowoc to investigate under Sheriff Rob Herman as a hit-and-run suspect. The DCI agent's reports indicate the victim's mother suspected Bushman, quote, "might fear some type of reprisal or professional retaliation from Rob Herman if the matter was taken seriously," unquote. In August 2004, Wisconsin DCI agent Eric Satkowski, I hate that name, quote, informed Herman that his name had been associated with rumors in the Manitowoc area that he might be involved in the hit-and-run death of Ricky Hochstetler. Inspector Herman said he was called into work on the case by Deputy Michael Bushman, possibly because Inspector Herman was experienced in accident reconstruction, unquote. During that same interview, Herman insisted he was not the hit-and-run driver because he drove his 1998 Chevrolet truck to the scene. Quote, Inspector Herman stated that he never owned a vehicle matching the description of the suspect vehicle, specifically a Chevrolet truck or van manufactured between 1985 and 1988, unquote. As one might expect, the DCI investigation left more questions than answers. Why didn't the agent probe Todd Herman when the same special agent's own reports indicated he heard Todd Herman was mentioned as a possible suspect? Foremost, why did the special agent take it at face value that the hit-and-run vehicle was a mid-1980s truck, van, or blazer, given that conclusion was based solely on the word of Rob Herman, the same sheriff's official under a dark cloud of suspicion for either being the culprit or the ringleader of the cover-up? In 2006, after being elected sheriff of Manitowoc, one of Rob Herman's first actions was to appoint his younger brother, Todd Herman, to Bushman's former job as third in command of the entire Manitowoc Sheriff's Office. In 2016, I worked as a Wisconsin investigative newspaper reporter re-examining the Ricky Hochstetler case. I tracked down the work cell phone number for Todd Herman. I called and asked a number of questions about him being a suspect in Ricky's death. Todd Herman was on vacation that week, so I caught him off guard when he answered my call. After I asked my first question, there was a long pause before he responded by comment. He continued to say no comment, suggesting I contact the sheriff, who was his older brother, for any comment pertaining to the case. At the time of our conversation, Todd Herman was Deputy Inspector of Operations. He oversaw the entire Detective Bureau, including the lieutenant of his agency's detectives, Andy Colborn. Despite the best efforts of the Herman family to keep Ricky's case out of the Wisconsin press and off anybody's radar, the case remains like a smoldering fire which keeps burning, an eternal flame for the community around Manitowoc. People in town are mad and frustrated that Ricky's family never got justice, and they're more outraged by the belief that the Manitowoc County culture of corruption was responsible for the case going unsolved. Back in July 2009, 5 years after closing its initial corruption investigation into the Manitowoc County Sheriff, the Wisconsin DCI revived Ricky's case while Rob Herman was sheriff and Todd Herman was third in command of the sheriff's office. The decision to reopen the matter came from the top. Craig Clive, the DCI's director of the Bureau of Investigative Services, noted, quote, "The caller wanted to remain anonymous and would provide no information on the source of the allegations other than the individuals who provided the information were high school friends of the suspect that did not want to get involved in the investigation and did not know the caller was providing information to authorities," unquote. 3 months later, a different special agent traveled to Two Rivers to interview the former live-in girlfriend of Rob Herman, also the mother of his child. She maintained she could not remember if he was actually awakened by a phone call to their house around 3 a.m. back in January 1999. It had been more than 10 years since the tragedy. She later urged the DCI to check with the Bill Maher Club to see if they had any records to verify whether or not Rob Herman patronized the Hall Party Club that night. By the time the DCI tracked down the club, the social hall informed the state of Wisconsin investigators that too much time had passed to be of any help. The Bill Maher no longer had any records pertaining to the names of their guests on January 9 and 10, 1999, the night of Ricky's horrible death. In October 2009, the DCI probe reached a dead end, now a second time. That same month, the 52-year-old Clive turned up dead inside his car on a Friday night in Madison at a parking garage. His wife, an assistant attorney general in the Wisconsin Department of Justice, found his body. The Wisconsin State Journal reported Clive had committed suicide using his service weapon. Quote, "Clive, our beloved son, brother, husband, father, uncle, and friend, who is cherished by all who knew him, died far too early when he unexpectedly took his life on Friday, October 23, 2009, unquote, his obituary notes. Chapter 16. This will be our final chapter for today. Nothing there. Oh, and I need a drink of water. If the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office was never supposed to be investigating Avery because of conflict of interest, then why was a man in his 50s who was directly involved in Avery's false arrest in 1985 coming out of retirement on the 5th day of Teresa's missing person case? That man designated a team leader for the day, was responsible for the only 2 events of magnitude that day. Sign-in logs, oh, those sign-in logs are such a mess, indicate Mike Bushman, who is at the center of the Ricky Hochstetler hit-and-run cover-up. Suspicions involving the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office had no involvement in the nearly week-old investigation of Teresa. But there he was, showing up on the Avery property bright and early, around 7:30 a.m., Monday, November 7. He signed in to the command post at the same time as Lieutenant Todd Herman. The same man many suspect was responsible for Ricky Hochstetler's death from 6 years earlier. Bushman and Todd Herman signed the command center log at 7:38 a.m. They were soon joined by fellow deputy Dave Siders, Sergeant Jason Yost, and Sergeant Scott Senglob. That day, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Group would achieve the most success in turning up previously undiscovered physical evidence as well as mysterious evidence that strongly suggested Teresa had met her gruesome demise about a half-mile away from the Avery property. Quote, "The group I was put in was Group A, and the team leader was Deputy M. Bushman," unquote, Siders said. Quote, "The property which we were assigned to search was a wooded area on White Cedar Road, west of Avery Auto Salvage, in addition to the property north of Stevens Avery's residence," unquote. The key word is assigned. It was a specific assignment, and Bushman was brought out of retirement to oversee the very delicate task. Little was documented in writing by Manitowoc County Sheriff's personnel about the mysterious site on Cuss Road, including any interactions between Bushman and Wiegert prior to Bushman heading out to the off-the-beaten-path location. Bushman, the designated Group A team leader, chose not to memorialize any of his activities for that entire day. Logs show he checked into the Avery Road Command Center at 7:38 a.m. There is a second log entry of Bushman re-entering the command post at 4:14 p.m., along with Jason Yost. At 5:33 p.m., Bushman, Yost, and Siders all signed the log showing they were done for the day. But Bushman's presence during the investigation of the Avery case only begs more questions. By Monday, November 7, pop-up came up on the screen. Kosurek was just days away from being hauled into a room full of hostile lawyers ready to grill their co-defendant in Avery's $36 million wrongful conviction lawsuit. Was Bushman someone who was supposed to drop into Teresa's investigation for one day, set the table, and quickly fade into the background before anybody would even notice he was there? In Ricky Hochstetler's horrific hit-and-run death, Bushman's legacy was not bringing the intoxicated and callous hit-and-run driver to justice. Several hours after Ricky's death, after the sun came up, Manitowoc County resident Robert Jeffrey saw several broken vehicle parts in the fresh snow at the rural intersection of Center and Newton Roads, the main intersection that led to Cleveland, Wisconsin. This was the same road that led toward Cleveland Auto Sales and Salvage, as well as Todd Herman's home. Bushman showed up at the intersection, yet did not take any photos or measurements of the vehicle debris. He also did not bring along any trained evidence technicians, even though this was a felony vehicular homicide, a serious crime that would have meant prison time for the culprit. Instead, he used a snow shovel to scoop the broken auto parts out of the snowbanks and chose not to pursue the fleeing motorist's direction of travel. Bushman was in no mood to pursue the probability that the hit-and-run motorist lived just a few miles down the road around Cleveland. He wrote in his report that the Newton driver, quote, "was unable to tell me which direction the suspect vehicle may have went after the pieces fell off," unquote. It was almost as if the car parts discovered at the seldom traveled rural intersection never existed. Once Bushman showed up to retrieve them, the intersection became an afterthought, as Bushman took enormous measures to steer the case away from Cleveland, Wisconsin. Bushman had a knack, the record reflects, for making sure critical evidence which could have aided in finding Ricky's killer became irrelevant. By the time Ricky's relatives and friends visited the family home on County Road CR around the date of the funeral services, the large snowbanks started to thaw, thanks to the sunshine. When one of the mourners pulled into the victim's family's driveway, the woman made a startling discovery. She saw numerous broken car parts protruding from the snow. Keep in mind that Ricky was struck just yards up the road, and the hit-and-run driver heading south would have passed the house. The damage in the fresh snow included a section of headlight lamp with letters and numbers from the manufacturer. The mourners knew the damage surely came from the vehicle that killed Ricky. The witnesses phoned their local sheriff's office, but this would turn into a major letdown once Deputy Jason Yost arrived to investigate. Besides recovering the main headlight lamp, quote, I also observed 3 other pieces of plastic lying just around the corner, unquote. In total, there were 4 broken vehicle parts that appeared to be from a newer car style, Yost stated in his reports. There were no other violent wrecks or collisions reported in front of the Hochstetler Rural County farmhouse that winter. Yet the identification of car damage was very problematic for sheriff's officials because, less than 7 hours after the crash occurred, Rob Herman already informed the agency's dispatchers to contact the Wisconsin Department of Transportation to obtain a 5-county listing of older model GMC trucks. This was a classic case of misdirection. Herman wanted to keep the rest of the sheriff's office preoccupied with a never-ending pile of busy work over the next several months. More importantly, Herman's co-workers never got hot on the trail of catching the true villain. Anyway, Deputy Yost returned to the sheriff's office, and in the days ahead, he huddled with Bushman, and the two discussed the fresh car parts found in the snow in front of Ricky's house. Yost wanted to climb the ladder at the sheriff's office. He was tight with the Herman brothers. In the end, Yost submitted the following report. Quote, I checked with Lieutenant Bushman, and due to the fact the pieces looked newer, he did not believe they belonged to the suspect vehicle on the hit-and-run fatality. At this time, no further follow-up will need to be done. Unquote. At no point over the years did Manitowoc County explore the possibility that a car was the type of vehicle that struck Ricky. As far as framing Avery for the crime, that was not possible since Avery remained in prison at that time, still serving out his unjust 32-year prison sentence for Gregory Allen's brutal rape. There was no rape. In 2004, when the DCI came to Manitowoc asking questions about a cover-up, Bushman responded by saying the state of Wisconsin's registry contained about 25,000 vehicles matching the description of the striking vehicle, and Bushman claimed that all 25,000 vehicles were cleared. Overall, the DCI special agent was troubled by Bushman's performance, as noted in his 2004 investigation, but he seemed to view the case more from the angle of incompetence rather than outright police misconduct on Bushman's part. Quote, in reviewing the reports, many of the vehicles that were reported do not have detailed descriptions of how they were cleared. This review assumes that every officer did a physical inspection of every vehicle, looking closely for signs of repair, replaced parts in areas that were damaged or could have been damaged. If each officer for each vehicle inspected did not follow that procedure, there is a possibility the striking vehicle was missed. Unquote. But how do you pull off a successful police cover-up? Misdirection is critical. The hit-and-run driver's path of travel home at her closing time on a Saturday night made it obvious the culprit was headed into far southern Manitowoc County, a largely rural and isolated area. But rather than pursue the most obvious angles, Bushman instructed others, such as Andy Colborn, David Remacher, and James Lenk, to waste precious on-duty time running down worthless leads. Assignments given to a number of patrol deputies put them on the road far away in places including Appleton, Fond du Lac, Green Bay, Kaukauna, Menasha, Neenah, Oconto, Shawano, and Wapaka. Around the 1-year anniversary, Sheriff Kosarik informed the local newspaper that he was shipping off the broken grill pieces to the FBI laboratory for analysis. It was unclear why he waited an entire year to do so. Additionally, the FBI was never given access to the broken headlight parts that surfaced in the melting snow near Debbie Hochstetler's driveway. In reviewing the case files, it was obvious Kosarik controlled the investigation, and Bushman was there to obey his orders. Under no circumstances were the Herman brothers, Rob and Todd, to be treated as criminal suspects in the crime or the cover-up. Other members of the sheriff's office have said that Bushman and Kosarik were in agreement. They would prefer to let Ricky's case go cold rather than conduct a rigorous investigation that would lead to one or two outcomes. Either clear the brothers of wrongdoing or find evidence showing the brothers had culpability in the crime and or the cover-up. As it stands, the facts remain the same. Ricky Hochstetler was dragged to his death by a fast car at bar closing time while walking home. Vehicle parts were located about 4 miles southwest of the crash scene, and the rural intersection was the main road toward Cleveland, Wisconsin, home of Cleveland Auto Sales and Salvage. Nobody was ever charged in connection with the gruesome hit-and-run death. What is known is that Mike Bushman spearheaded a sloppy, high-profile homicide investigation that got off to a suspiciously disastrous start, and the case floundered from there. Crucial crime scene evidence was mishandled, and other noteworthy clues were allowed to fade into oblivion, all thanks to Bushman. So it stands to reason in the 2005 disappearance of the Auto Trader photographer, had someone in Manitowoc County called Bushman out of retirement, realizing they were at a crossroads at an experienced problem solver was needed to put the Cuss Road intrigue to a final rest. That morning, November 7, 2005, only a select number of key law enforcement got to the police command post on Avery Road before Bushman, notably Mark Wiegert at 6:32 a.m., and Bushman's replacement, Deputy Inspector Greg Shetter, who was a dear friend of the Herman brothers, at 6:53 a.m., John Dietering at 7:01 a.m., Tom Fassbender at 7:09 a.m., James Link at 7:15 a.m., and Andy Colborn and Dennis Jacobs at 7:16 a.m. Calumet Sheriff Jerry Poggle and several other Calumet Sheriff's deputies and investigators. But with no arrests and every day moving closer toward retired Sheriff Tom Kosarik's unsettled federal lawsuit deposition, the discovery of a genuine burial site off Cuss Road was not conducive to an Avery is a guilty, bloodthirsty, psychopathic killing machine narrative that Manitowoc Sheriff Kenny Peterson wanted to gin up around the community. That Monday morning, after Manitowoc County sent a large contingent of loyalists and minions of Sheriff Peterson back to Avery Road, two major events occurred, both involving Manitowoc County personnel in the search group associated with Bushman. Quote, while searching land north of Stephen Avery's residence, a cornfield, I came across a burning barrel, which was in my section of area to search. The burning barrel was located out in front of Stephen's residence next to the cornfield. I approached the burning barrel and looked inside. I observed a metal vehicle rim and laid it outside the burning barrel. Once I lifted the metal rim, I observed some burnt, melted plastic items. It appeared to me to be a cell phone. I took a closer look to the cell phone and noted there was an M emblem on the front of it. It appeared to be the emblem for a Motorola brand cell phone, unquote, Deputy Sider said. Quote, Deputy Bushman came over and observed the remains of what appeared to be a cell phone. He then contacted the officer in charge and informed him that we had some items which needed to be looked at by detectives, unquote. Later that same morning, Bushman was directly involved in the second major incident, arguably the biggest event of the day. As mentioned earlier, Bushman did not document any of his activities that day, including why he was even involved, given that he was already retired, given that he worked for Manitowoc County, and given that he was involved in the 1985 false arrest of Avery. Calumet County's John Dietering summarized the day-long events at Kuss Road in 5 short paragraphs. He chose to put few, if any, details in his report. At 10:35 a.m., Wiegert, quote, requested that an investigator go to the east end of Kuss Road. I did respond and spoke with retired Deputy Inspector Michael Bushman, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Bushman was leading a team of searchers in the area. It should be noted that the end of Kuss Road is approximately 1/2 mile away from the western edge of the Avery property, unquote. Here's what Sergeant Bill Tyson, one of Dietering's colleagues, wrote in his report. Quote, I received a phone call indicated we needed to leave Barbara Yanda's residence and respond to Kuss Road for a suspicious incident. Lieutenant Link, Sergeant Colborn, and I left Barbara Yanda's residence at 10:58 a.m. After clearing from the suspicious incident, we did go back to Barbara Yanda's residence to finish collecting firearms from the residence, unquote. Tyson added that, quote, search volunteers had located an area approximately 3 feet by 3 feet that appeared to be disturbed soil, unquote. Dietering got to the dead-end road at 10:45 a.m., where he huddled with Bushman, who, quote, indicated he had found a possible excavation site and did take us to the site, unquote. What Dietering's report did not point out was the enormous lag time in contacting state forensic scientist John Ertl and his 3-person unit from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab that was being used that week to exclusively process potential crime scene in Teresa's disappearance. Wiegert and Fassbender may not have wanted the State Crime Lab intimately involved in overseeing the evidence collection efforts, probably because if evidence was being planted, shifted, or collected to go away, Ertl's unit was likely to blow the lid and unmask somebody's cover. Having a whistleblower as a constant presence could have been disastrous for Manitowoc and Calumet County's all-out efforts targeting Avery for Teresa's killing. That's the picture of where on Kuss Road that the dogs had pointed to. Despite the red alert on Kuss Road, Ertl's team remained jettisoned 45 miles away, toiling away inside an enclosed garage at the Calumet Sheriff's Office. The discovery on Kuss Road remained tight-lipped within the inner circle of Wiegert, Dietering, and Bushman, who then chose to notify Colborn, Link, and Tyson. At no point that Monday morning was Ertl's 3-man crew summoned to Kuss Road to investigate the suspicious possible burial site near where the bloodhounds and tracking dogs also located Teresa's scent. While the Manitowoc County-led group huddled and plotted strategy regarding Kuss Road, Ertl's team began combing through 4 burning barrels that were confiscated the previous day by Link, Colborn, Remaker, and Dan Kucharski from the Bobby Killer Dassey property. For reasons never explained, the 4 deputies had inexplicably chosen to ignore the lone burn barrel of Avery, even though it was out in plain view in the front of his yard, and he was their prime suspect. Another 24 hours would pass before Deputy Dave Siders, a member of Bushman's Group A, would follow his intuition and not only peer into the Avery barrel, but reach inside and then start pulling out the contents. Quote, we set up the sifting equipment in the garage and began examining the contents of the barrels, beginning with the 2 of interest to the dog, unquote, Ertl said. Quote, these contained a lot of partially burned food and game animal material, including chicken, fish, and deer. Some hair, metal items, and as many unassociated bones as possible were recovered. The first barrel was finished and the second begun, unquote. After a busy morning, Ertl and his crew took a noon lunch break. Back in neighboring Manitowoc County, where the action was heating up, Detering and Bushman, two men about the same age, remained in conversation on Kuss Road. A total of 90 minutes had passed since Detering learned of the suspicious possible burial site, but there was still no phone call to alert Ertl's team from the state crime lab to the mysterious find. Ertl's team finished lunch at 12:30 p.m. and resumed their work in the sheriff's office garage. By the time Ertl's crew got to Kuss Road, shortly before 2 p.m., more than 3 hours had passed since Bushman notified his longtime confidants at neighboring Calumet County about his Kuss Road discovery. The lag time only deepened suspicions about whether incriminating evidence of a crime scene was being hauled away. In any event, when Ertl's unit arrived at Kuss Road, he saw, quote, white plastic sheeting that protruded from the ground on either side of an area 3 feet in diameter, devoid of plants, apparent decomposed wood, or peat-like material. Some moss lay nearby, uprooted. However, there was no sign that soil had been excavated and replaced, unquote. Now that Ertl's group had been called to the scene, there was apparently nothing incriminating there. Quote, the area, devoid of plants, appeared to be peat moss, and the plastic sheet the remnants of a peat moss bag, as per the label on the underside. Beneath the bag were the decomposing remains of a wooden pallet. The area was excavated further, and no disturbance to the soil layering was evident, unquote. By mid-afternoon, the team of Lank, Colborn, and Tyson was also summoned back to Kuss Road for a second time. Quote, after the photography by the Wisconsin State Crime Lab was completed, Lieutenant Lank, Sergeant Colborn, and I began digging up the area and quickly found out this was not a possible grave or burial site. Upon reporting those findings to Investigator Detering, the crime scene tape had been removed and the area was reopened, unquote, Tyson said. Ertl's group, summoned to the highly suspicious scene 3 hours late, finished their assignment at 5:45 p.m. and then returned to the garage in Chilton to continue to process Bobby's, the killer, 4 burning barrels. But now another one had been delivered to the sheriff's garage. Quote, a 5th barrel, reportedly containing remnants of a Motorola cellular phone, had also been transported to the sheriff's office in Chilton, unquote, Ertl noted. Between 7:30 and 9:30 p.m., Ertl's crew continued processing Bobby's, the killer's, burn barrels. Quote, we finished with the 2nd barrel, cleaned up the work area, and departed the sheriff's office. We proceeded to the Best Western Motel in Chilton, ate dinner, and retired, unquote. As far as the investigation's paper trail was concerned, the incident at the cul-de-sac of Kuss Road was a big nothing. Quote, the possible excavation area was processed by Wisconsin State Crime Lab personnel, and at 4:51 p.m. I was notified the excavation area was not pertinent to this case, unquote, Detering wrote. As for Bushman, he faded into the sunset. He never wrote a single report concerning any of his activities on Kuss Road, even though he was made a search team leader. He was indirectly involved in the recovery of the charred phone at the bottom of Avery's burn barrel, and he was directly responsible for the events that made Kuss Road a day-long police circus. Had Bushman stumbled upon something on Kuss Road that he should not have? The absence of paperwork only widens the mystery concerning why one of Sheriff Kosorik's most loyal henchmen was suddenly tapped to come out of retirement to help for only one day on the Avery case. In the end, the police maintained a constant presence on Avery Road for 5 more days through Saturday, November 12, 2005. But Bushman's role in the case was now over. He had done well. And that is it for today. We will pick up tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central, starting on chapter 17, which is page 173 out of 361. So, find me tomorrow at 1 p.m. Chicago time here in MAM Gossip. I am going to go. See you tomorrow. Investigation continues.